Hi there. I have read your practicum log number 2, and I have read your reflective exercise number 3 this week. I provided feedback. Remember in your practicum log that the feedback you're going to find is going to be mostly in Typhon. It is so important that you read the feedback that is provided in Typhon and apply changes to your final log. It is especially important if you have errors in your time log and how you're calculating your errors, or if you've associated your hours with the wrong course. All of that has to be fixed so that you can have a grade posted for this course. So make sure the first thing you do before you start your practicum log number 3 is to fix your time log. So take care of that as a priority. The reflective exercise that you did this week was talking about O'Brien's sub-themes of servant leadership. And I think I told you this last week. It is one of my favorite assignments to read because it is a beautiful story of what your work practice has looked like. Across the spectrum, there were so many great stories from you all talking about one of you talked about having a suicidal patient that you developed trust with so that they entrusted you with a plan to harm themselves, and that outcome was good for your patient. Talking about not leaving an elderly patient alone and actually just sitting by the bedside and listening and actively listening. Being with patients who had a new cancer diagnosis and had lots and lots of questions and was too overwhelmed really to be able to process the information, but that you were fully present and listening to what that person was saying. Evidence of allowing a patient to have a certain amount of privacy and dignity and determining what they were comfortable with in nursing, nurses providing care in a vulnerable period. One of my favorite stories was one of you discussing helping an elderly woman be able to be cradled by her husband as she passed, and to facilitate that physical presence for the husband to be there to comfort her, and what a beautiful gesture that was in her dying moments. Another great one was the implementation of a soldier's journey. A soldier's journal when they were admitted after a duty-related injury, and the journal was written in by fellow co-workers to document their journey through the healthcare process, and it was a gift that would be given either to the soldier or to the family based on the soldier's outcome. Thinking, what a loving servant type of behavior to do for those soldiers. Looking at being fully attentive during an episode where you were having to listen to a patient who was not able to articulate being the victim of domestic violence, but because this nurse leader witnessed one of her colleagues being very in tune to the messaging that was being sent in a passive way, that actually resulted in a very assertive manner of the nurse to provide a great deal of service. The facilitating of doing a life review videography episode for a young woman who was dying, and allowing her the opportunity to record her life experiences as she was processing the anticipation of her own death, but the nurse's involvement in providing that type of structure and that type of support to that type of resource. The being fully present during the loss of a child. In this case, it was a series of miscarriages, of being a wounded healer and being able to share that sorrow with a patient in an appropriate therapeutic way was so touching. Sometimes the simple acts of, if you have a patient who's in the room overnight waiting with a dying patient or an acutely ill one of your classmates just simply made sure that a recliner was prepared and as close as possible to their loved one who was in bed and was acutely ill. Sometimes those simple things, those little things that we just take as part of being a nurse, can change the entire patient's perspective and even the family's perspective. The culturally competent care that we provide during the dying process can really shift the patient's thinking about the healthcare system, if we do it in such a way that one of your classmates did, in being very respectful of their traditions, even though it wasn't a Judeo-Christian burial tradition. But being culturally competent is an incredible example of being servant oriented. And the last one that really touched my heart was the loss of a newborn patient, by a mom, and this one of your classmates just being really there with that grieving mom and being there at the bedside. One of the themes that I took from so many of your stories is the level of heartache and sorrow that nurses are fully present, up close, impersonal in our journeys in our profession. And I think sometimes we forget that part of being, whether we're dealing with servant leadership behaviors where we are in the forefront of guiding and protecting and serving our team, or whether we're at the bedside being a bedside nurse leader, guiding and serving and supporting our patients, all of that has a secondary impact on our emotional wellness. I really took some time to pray over the reflective exercises this morning, really think about the impact that these experiences must have had on your hearts, and that these became kind of that indelible marker that left its stain in how you perceive healthcare and your role and the importance of that. And so many beautiful testimonies of what it looked like for you to be the hands and feet of Christ in the periods of sorrow, in the periods of death and dying, or acute illness. None of your stories talked about the joyous things that happen in healthcare, welcoming new healthy life, or after the transplant that was successful and everybody's happy. It's the sad things, the things that make us grieve, that we hang on to, and that often guide our practice. So I hope as you process this and you really thought about this role of what it meant to be a servant leader, and what it meant to be at the bedside, that you thought about O'Brien's concepts, that you really spent some time reflecting on this and praying over those experiences. I hope you do take a few minutes to think about the good things that have happened, that have shaped who you are, that when you were in service, they were during good times, because there's lots of good stuff we do in nursing that happened during the happy times. So I hope that molds and shapes you as well. When you prepare for next week, you've got a discussion board that extends on this, on the theme of advocacy. So I would like to see you continue with that. And then I would start working on your spiritual philosophy paper next week. Remember, you're going to be comparing and contrasting O'Brien and Porter O'Grady's work. You want to make sure you do not provide me a summary of all of these concepts. The concepts that you're doing are the 10 spiritual rules of the road and the nurse servant leadership behavioral themes. They're two things, but there's lots of overlap, and there's lots of things that are dissimilar. You want to provide me a well-constructed paper about how things are similar and how they are different. Do not provide me a summary and a definition of all of these. One of the missteps students sometimes do is they spend about 6 pages telling me what the book already tells me, and failing to synthesize what the book is saying, and comparing and contrasting and finding the similar themes and the different themes, and being able to connect that directly to the nurse leader role. Make sure you're thoughtful about this. I would highly encourage using a concept map or a web design of writing everything out and then circling and drawing lines between concepts that are similar, organizing it either in a paper fashion or a virtual fashion before you start writing, and really think through this. There's some really cool things that are very similar from two very different sets of writers. So I will look forward to seeing that work. It is not due in week 7, it's due in week 8, but I want you to think about it, plan on it, so that your best effort is made evident in week 8. Week 8 gets a little heavy, and you are going to be tired and ready for Christmas. So just start planning and getting ahead of things. Know that I'm here. If you have questions or concerns, know that I'm praying for you. I know how tired you are and how ready for just having a break and a couple of weeks off you are. I think faculty are right there with you. I feel like we got a lot of things swirling and not enough time to get it done. But that does not mean that I'm not available. Know that I am. Let me know how I can support you in the next week or so. If I don't hear anything, I'll look forward to seeing your work. Take care.